The sea, but without a heart, you cannot fit.
What's up, everybody? This is Jorcy Samuels, and you are tuning in to episode 77 of the It Will Come show. And of course, as mentioned every day, this show is sponsored by Fire at Fire Corp. And today I'm actually going to be talking about the recent oil crash that just took place over the last 24 to 48 hours, and how that's going to impact communities, tech, and even the environment. Actually, it might be a positive thing. So let's dive straight into it. Cool. So actually, who I heard about this information from was Mike Maloney, who's a guy that I've been following for many, many years. He owns a business and a website called goldsilver.com. Everything that is happening right now, he pretty much predicted up to about 90% accuracy, which is phenomenal. So to see everything play out the way that it is right now is, yeah. So anyways, he did predict that there would be something would be happening with oil stocks and just oil in general. And what happened exactly, and for those of you watching who aren't familiar with this world, it's okay. I will try to explain some of the concepts as much as possible. And if you have any questions and you're watching this live, just feel free to ask your questions away in the live chat. So here I've highlighted, today will go down in history. The price of a barrel of West Texas Intermediate. These guys here are kind of used as the standard to watch for in terms of oil prices. Plunged into negative territory. One contract sold for jaw-dropping negative $37.36. What this means is that the price of a barrel of oil was in the negatives. It hasn't happened before, ever. The May WTI contract, so there are these contracts that take place, and every month you'll either see them expire or renewed. And here with this WTI contract, cratered today as oil traders scramble to get out of their position. That's because they must take physical delivery of this oil, which is a problem given that the country is running out of storage space. That's leaving them with no choice but to pay to unload these contracts, since it would cost them money to store it anyway. So what this would mean is that if you got a car and you would go fill up your car right now, technically it should be the cheapest it's ever been. Maybe even down to 1937 or 1987 price levels. I was seeing that on Twitter, and that's just wild, right? And so the main reason for the plummet in prices, there is not enough storage space, so oversupply, too much oil, and so companies are actually paying consumers to take the barrels off them. And what this means essentially over time is, if this continues to occur, then a lot of these companies will go bankrupt, and a lot of nations and governments rely on oil for their wealth. And this is, again, really kind of fascinating. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to play this bit here. Actually, I'll leave this video for the last bit. So let me just put it towards the end, because what Mike Maloney actually has to say is kind of interesting. And Nikki says, the world needs an SD card slot. You might need to explain what you mean by that. So, next article. Okay, low demand for oil leaves gas prices, and let me switch up my screen. Across the national, I think they meant to say nation, plummeting. First off, we've never seen what is going on today. We've never seen the price of future oil contracts actually going negative. We will probably see some bankruptcies in the oil industry because of this, as mentioned. We will feel it even more here. While many communities across the U.S. applaud when the price of oil goes down, we don't here because we know it only affects us at the pump, but it affects jobs. And this is sort of what's happening right now. You're seeing sort of this tension between what may be right for the environment versus what may be right for people's immediate needs in terms of jobs. Right? We can't forget that a lot of these industries and companies have generated a lot of jobs for people, right? So their livelihoods are based in it. It's hard to just simply point the finger and lump everybody that's working in these industries as bad or evil, right? Because they are just like you and me. And so with that, what that means is if there are bankruptcies and further job losses, then, well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know what happens. Right now I think we just got a snowball effect of, various industries just kind of going bust and realizing that they haven't maybe saved up or taken on the old advice of like making sure you have cash surplus, for bad times. So many industries, I know the Virgin Airlines, they are, I think, are asking or seeking loans from the government to help keep them afloat. What this means, though, is that a lot of businesses essentially that just haven't taken that old advice of saving up, being profitable. Now we're seeing the consequences of that. So what this means in the future, I think, as well, is that people are going to go back to some of those old school values that our grandparents used to have, right? We always used to wonder why they would save so much, or they would continue living like they were poor, right? Now we get to experience that ourselves, right? Because we then emotionally feel these consequences. So yeah, jobs will be lost, but on the plus side, it does mean less oil fracking and damage to the environment in general. This other article was actually shared by Nikki, who just commented, and it was, "We need water before oil. Kenyan communities scarred by Chinese oil exploration." Now this. Even though this was published on the 16th, right? This was before we just got news of the price of oil plummeting. Okay, so I've highlighted a few things. Now, what was happening here is that obviously Chinese companies have been digging for oil in many other countries around the world for a long while, and the business of this has had huge impacts on the local ecosystems. Now, in some communities, it has led to prosperity, but for some other countries, it has actually led to destitution, which isn't great either. So, but the government and the Chinese never consulted us when they began exploring for oil. So, just more exploitation. They came and left. They have never honored their promises made to the community up to today. But getting to distant villages affected by the oil exploration can take a whole day, thanks to the damage done by the heavy trucks, which left large potholes in the dirt roads. It has made the going tough and causes many vehicles to break down, so these are knock-on effects. When it rains, the villages are completely cut off. The company's impact on the community wasn't restricted to poor roads. Despite the promises, many local residents struggled to get a decent wage. Economic consequences. CNOOC says it agreed the wages with the local community before hiring laborers, but would not comment on the amount it paid. So could have been, very low. Everyone wants to be served first before supplies are finished. So this is now looking into the health side. This is because this hospital is always lacking drugs. We do not know what the Chinese found and left with during the oil exploration exercise, and we do not know what they deposited there. What we only know is that they left pain and suffering here. Now, this is actually a common story. I know this has actually happened in the South Pacific as well, where many, I guess, more knowledgeable, educated, developed countries or nations, right, come to these poorer nations and essentially, exploit what's there. And I don't know if you can blame them or not, right? Because I know there are some nations who were in that position but then decided to learn very quickly. History has shown that. But at the same time, I guess a lot of people want to see, like, where's the care and compassion? Fortunately, if you're involved in the world of business, it can be quite ruthless. So here, culture of fear. The experience has created a culture of fear in the community. When you have a lot of fear in a community, it pushes people to do crazy things, do things that they might not have otherwise. And so, trust gets degraded, and it's just not a good thing, right? And this is the thing of relying too on foreign money. I think what's happening now in the world is that we're starting to see people, maybe they will focus more on their local communities, and hence why I mentioned that in today's episode title. Now, the other article I wanted to read is from the tech side. So, with the plummeting of the oil price and looking at how the stock prices actually for these oil companies didn't really change much, let's have a look here. Okay, so I'm looking at an article that's related to cryptocurrencies. If you haven't heard of cryptocurrency before, but you have heard of Bitcoin, technically Bitcoin has been called a cryptocurrency. It uses cryptographic elements, and it's just a way for securing. But in the crypto community, they were talking about here, crypto traders are used to 300% moves because a lot of people have made money in the crypto world, through the volatility, but they've also lost a lot. So here, thanks to the low liquidity environment across many altcoins, CZ Binance is the founder of an exchange called Binance. Somewhat controversial figure too, known to be very supportive of communities. But he was making a joke here. 1 BNB, that's his cryptocurrency, equals 153 barrels of oil. Somebody else had actually put up this image, which I thought was hilarious. Now 1 toilet paper is equal to 5 barrels of oil. That's how wild the markets are getting right now. Okay. Others posit the question that if oil can drop to zero, what's preventing Bitcoin and other crypto assets from doing the same? Yes, right? What is preventing Bitcoin and other assets dropping to zero or negative? I think this is very much a real scenario. I think this could happen. And there's something coming up soon called the Bitcoin halving or halvening. And what this means is that for every Bitcoin that is mined into existence, essentially the reward for it is about 50% of what it was of the last 4 years. And so this may also force many Bitcoin mining companies, which you could compare to like gold mining companies, right? And instead of mining gold out in the real world, these Bitcoin mining companies are mining Bitcoin in a digital world. Crazy, right? But Bitcoin has been a massive social experiment in terms of if a new form of money or cash currency system, right, comes out, could it be Bitcoin? That remains to be seen. Right now, a lot of people are kind of flocking to gold and silver, and Bitcoin is also kind of being associated with that. So in this new world that's being created, let's see what happens. And this is also why I follow it very closely, because I think that it might be, something as big as a new money system is going to have huge ramifications on online behavior, communities, and how the world works in the future in general. So I do think Bitcoin could plummet itself. Now, on the positive side, some people say, hey, $40 oil will return. I think actually it already went back up to like $20 or something, but the volatility is still crazy. Fossil fuels, I remember reading an article as well about some conspiracy around fossil fuels being actually given by John D. Rockefeller, one of those crazy old-timer OG billionaires of our world. And there was some conspiracy theory around, or rumor, about how he actually renamed oil to be fossil fuel to actually increase the demand of it. But I won't go into that theory here today. So essentially what this guy is saying is that, so let's have a look here, right? Let's read this. It seems that oil isn't the precious commodity it has been made out to be. Much ink has been spilled out on the concept of peak oil, wherein dwindling reserves of oil cause rising prices as the marketplace becomes more and more supply constrained. In the endgame scenario, supply shocks send prices soaring to levels that force global economies to find alternative fuels. Renewable energy or otherwise, and so I think that's a good thing, right? It's kind of fascinating how like nature has found a way to just push all of these sort of unsustainable things away and force us to go internal to stay at home. Like it's just and a key issue with the peak oil theory is that reserves are only counted if they're known to exist and can be extracted with current technology. All right. So, there was the peak oil theory that was mentioned there, and there's also something called anti-fragility. So in the video that I'm going to now play for you. So let me just play this.
If we manage to return to the principles of the market economy, including, which means free market, unmanipulated free market economy, including, most crucially, a return to undistorted price discovery. Price discovery is simply the mechanism of everybody haggling in the market. It's over a deal. You're trying to find the best price for something that you want for the currency that you've worked so hard for. And when you do that and you find the best price and you buy from them and you discover maybe they've got lousy service or a bad product, you buy from somebody else, these trillions of transactions in an economy set supply and demand in equilibrium. Anytime an authority manipulates the price, there's disastrous results. You get bubbles or you get shortages. And so there's always unintended consequences from manipulating anything. And those unintended consequences, then sometimes you've got to manipulate that. And there's another.
Okay, so just pausing that and relating it back to what we're going through right now. So essentially, these price manipulations that he's talking about, this happens at a government level too, right? So back in 1975, the U.S. Unpegged itself from the gold standard, right? Its currency, the U.S. dollar. Since then, we could argue that we've had this massive economic boom, etc. But a lot of it has. It's like printing monopoly money. And so what Mike Maloney has been talking a lot about is how this, by unpegging ourselves from a currency or from a form of money that is actually limited in supply, right? It's actually now revealing the consequences many generations later, right now, right? Whereby essentially because you've had the Federal Reserve essentially like just pulling a lever to control the supply of money, right? So they would know when things got out of hand, you print more money. When they needed to retract stuff, they would just stop printing it, right? Cause things to come down, interest rates come down, etc. And what's happening in the world right now is that they are essentially doing more of that to save themselves from essentially a root systemic issue, which is that we unpegged ourselves from something like the gold standard, right? So there's a few different economic theories being battling one another at the moment, and there's the economists who believe that we should be able to print the currency supply at will, right? And that is what will help. And then there are others who believe that we should not be playing with that at all, that the amount of money in the world should be limited in supply. And this actually comes back to Bitcoin. If you didn't know this already, there's about 21 or 23 million Bitcoin that can ever be mined into existence. And the reason for that is it took some of the lessons of gold itself, right? But put it into a digital form. Because, I guess the downside of gold, right, is that you can't, even though it is divisible, it is fungible, you cannot really break it apart as easily like something as digital as Bitcoin. So the idea was that, you would put a limit on the number of Bitcoin that could ever be mined into existence. But unfortunately, so all these other cryptocurrencies that came out kind of dispelled the scarcity factor of Bitcoin, right? Because if everybody else can actually create their own millions of tokens or whatever cryptocurrency they want, it sort of limits the ability for Bitcoin to do what it was meant to do or what it wanted to do. So the only thing that could save it right now is if the whole world or enough people in the world agree that Bitcoin was the new world currency or form of money, right? And then there's a whole bunch of other things that you can actually build on top of that, but we'll save that for another day. Okay, so just continue.
Unintended consequence. And then you've got to control that thing. And after a while, you're just like Venezuela trying to control everything, and the whole thing ends up imploding. That's what happened during in the USSR. That was the most scientifically run experiment in socialism there has ever been. And when you distort price discovery, you just ruin the markets. But in the capital markets, so this is when they distort price discovery in the capital markets, the price of currency, for instance, is interest rates. Interest rates are the main tool. The world's central banks manipulating interest rates and distorting that price discovery. And so that is the price of currency. All of the
So, yeah, that's Mike Maloney. Again, as always, I will put the links to all of these articles in this video in the show notes or the episode notes after. But, highly recommend you watch this video too. And just follow along Mike and everything that he sort of shares during this time. You really can't go wrong. But let's go back. So, yeah, with this, right, what he's talking about is just... It's again so fascinating to watch because I think a lot of people have thought that, right, like this stuff will be over with soon. It's going to take, I think it's going to go till about 2022 before we see any sort of switch in direction. And, we're just seeing, it's only been 4 months of this year, right? And just look at how much has happened. And I think a lot of people, just because we haven't experienced this before in our lives, a lot of people aren't prepared. So, definitely lean on your communities during this time, lean on your support. If you find yourself in isolation, you're going to have to take care of yourself from so many different aspects. But most importantly, right, the reason why I tie this in with community stuff is that communities, I look at the socioeconomics, right? One thing I found fascinating about communities, and right now online, we have clients coming to us for FIA, asking about how to build, an online community or migrate their offline customers to an online community. And I think this is because it's the only thing that allows a business or allows people to band together and to work through things at this point in time. And there's a lot of opportunities that are being generated, right? If you actually look, there are some companies that are benefiting highly during this period, right? If you look at Zoom, Slack, these sort of companies, and a lot of other tech companies. But again, the money and power in the world is being shifted and moved to different places. Okay, so I think that's what we really need to take a look at. New technologies are going to be formed. New technology is going to be formed, and I think this is going to be again, the next sort of Netflix, the next sort of Google, the next Amazon is actually going to be built during this time. And that's what's crazy and exciting at the same time, is that right now there are those startups being built as we're talking. And, it's something that I'm watching while at the same time taking care and preparing right now. So there's a saying, when times are good, prepare for when times are bad. When times are bad, expect that times will get good again. All right. So, put that there. Okay. And then finally, in that video with Mike Maloney, so let me put it here. There's this concept that was talked about called anti-fragility, right? And this actually, I see this a lot in terms of what has been happening in our society. And I'll try and tie this together as best I can. So there's this concept called anti-fragility. So no more snake oil, architecting agility through anti-fragility. So here, rather than aiming to control or to remove control, we seek to build systems, both technical and business, that aim to be anti-fragile to change. This allows the production of business and technical architecture that actually enable agility through design rather than process or mindset, right? So what the equivalent of this would be is like, I remember learning about stress testing for microservices on Netflix, right? So when I was working for my previous company, there were these developer sessions, and I think they had someone from Netflix, give a talk. And they were talking about how they actually created these internal like bots and tools to intentionally try to bring down their entire Netflix architecture, right? But they would do that in a contained environment, right? And they did this intentionally to build its resilience, right? And you could probably relate this, right, to the people side. If you remember, there was a period in time where there was sort of a anti-bullying campaign, right? And people were looking to completely snuff out bullying. And what's interesting is, if you've been watching for a while, right? I'm a huge fan of wolves, and there's an old Native American proverb which says, "The wolves make the buffalo strong," right? So what they're talking about is that even though from an outside point of view, you might look at nature as being mean or cruel, right? And wolves taking down like potentially the weak or the old or the young. But the sort of unintended consequence of that, or maybe intended, is that the buffalo herd actually becomes stronger as a result, right? And in relation to sort of the bullying analogy, imagine if you took out all the bullies in the world. Right? There might be some other lessons that individuals would not have learned if it weren't for the bullies. Yes, it's cruel, but once upon a time, I think maybe in the 80s or 90s, people would say, no, let's not remove all the bullies. Let's increase self-defense skills. Let's increase the kids' abilities to be able to fight back, right, or to defend themselves. but we kind of forgot that and just went to straight like, okay, let's just remove all the bullies. In my opinion, I don't think that actually solves the problem, because what happens in the long run is then you get people who actually aren't familiar with that sort of resistance or that sort of aggression, and they don't know how to deal with it, right? Even like the Shaolin monks, right? They're very peaceful by philosophy, ideas, and beliefs, but they knew that they needed to learn how to fight, right, in order to defend themselves if they needed to, because the reality of the world is that there's good and bad, right? And so anti-fragility is just all about, instead of doing bailouts. So what's happening right now, if you look at sort of all the governments and all of these companies that are failing, all these big companies that are failing, they're failing because they did not set themselves up well, right? They did not save extra money or cash to be able to deal with these sort of crises. They've just been going into debt and using other people's money and just spending frivolously, right? Without going to the basics, you know? And I think that just whole way of living is just coming back to haunt us, right? Like, these are the consequences of that type of living. And so with that, what governments are doing is playing a parent that is literally turning a blind eye to maybe poor decisions of their children, right? And just bailing them out and trying to save them all the time, instead of allowing them to actually go through the pain and to learn the hard lessons. Because if you just keep, pumping money, creating money to cover these problems, you're just putting band-aid solutions, and that's not a solution at all. And so the impact on that, it trickles across many communities around the world. So again, I'm looking at all this because it actually ties into the way that we treat each other, to the way that we interact online. All of these things result in behavior change, and that actually ties into a lot of the work that we do. So, yep, with that, I hope you enjoyed today's session. Remember, if you have any questions, just put it in the comments below. And don't forget to, like and subscribe. Share this with anyone who you think it may be of interest to. And as always, remember, through patience and persistence, it will come.